Hello, y'all. Welcome to the 12th episode of the Anti-Filter podcast. I am your host, Alison,
And I'm your host, Shannon.
and this is a podcast for the girls, the gays, the theys, the mentally ill, the disabled, the neurodivergent, and the criminally insane. Now, we usually do a weekly catch up on our podcast. This week, we are not going to be doing that. This week, we are going to be talking about something that's very important and it's very serious. So we're not going to be talking about stupid shit that's happened throughout our week. Okay, so we have some notes. If you see me looking down at my phone, that's what I'm reading from. Um, this is going to be a conversation that white people should be having with other white people. And it's going to be a very triggering topic of conversation. It's going to make people feel uncomfortable. And we have the potential to get some things wrong here. But the pursuit of talking about important things is going to require us to make some mistakes. And we're going to be talking about anti-racism today. A couple years ago, I was following Saira and Regina Jackson on LinkedIn. I became familiarized with their documentary called Deconstructing Karen, and they also released a book shortly after called White Women. Shannon and I watched it last night together, and we wanted to talk to you about what we saw. I think the biggest takeaway that we got from this documentary is if you are white, you are racist. And that's something that we all have to acknowledge, and we all have to acknowledge that we are born into white supremacy as white people, and we have to acknowledge our privilege in order to move forward.
I think that was something that they mentioned in the documentary pretty early on,
Yeah.
was that, and obviously the documentary, right, if you're unfamiliar, it's basically a dinner party with a bunch of white women as guests. They pay to come, and it's two hosts who are black and brown.
Yeah.
And they're basically trying to get white women to understand their experience and just in general how the complacency of white women specifically
Yep.
has led to the continuation of white supremacy.
Mm.
So one thing that they've really stressed that's important is white people taking the accountability and acknowledging, right? Like just acknowledging that by being in denial and not acknowledging it, you're sweeping it under the rug and you're allowing white supremacy to continue. So I think that was like one of the first points that they kind of made there.
It's interesting because when we first started watching it, I told you, I was like, you're going to get pissed off really, really fast. And one of the first things that was very not surprising to hear, but there were a few women who believed that they weren't racist because they said that they don't see color. Now, if we take a look at the pyramid of white supremacy, which I've pulled up on here, it basically talks about how at the top of the pyramid of white supremacy is genocide, and at the bottom is indifference. So indifference can look like things like politics don't affect me, avoiding confrontation with racist family members, not challenging racist jokes, and remaining apolitical. So a lot of people assume that white supremacy is very like far right ideology when that's not the case. Another point that they brought up that was very important in this is that white liberal women like ourselves are the most dangerous white women because
Yes.
we believe ourselves to be good and nice people. And through that, we aren't challenging ourselves, people around us, and doing the daily anti-racism work that's necessary in order for us to just do the most basic thing, which is not uphold white supremacy.
And I was just going to add a note too that I think like after we watched the documentary, like even just reflecting on my own, like when you realize how privileged a mindset of, well, like politics, like I'm not into that. That's not something I'm interested in. Or like how privileged are we able to take that side on things because it doesn't affect us. Actually, ironically, I was scrolling on social media right before we were getting on online for the podcast, and I was eating breakfast, and it was this woman, and she was talking about how like it's important that we vote because like our children's lives are at stake. And it was a white woman with a white family referencing Trump. And again, obviously politics is a huge part of anti-racism, but just regardless, like it's wild to me that sometimes, right, like in the right, I shouldn't even say right wing, the white winged like mindset, they impose people of color as being an enemy. And it just, even the narrative alone, like it's just, it was very interesting to see after obviously like watching what we did watch. And obviously me and you are two people who I think have been obviously very aware and self-aware to the fact that there's things that we need to work on and do better with, and things that we as white women, having the privilege that we do have, like the, what are the words that I'm looking for, just the way that we need to like carry ourselves and the way that we need to uplift other voices of color, right? Because we can sit here and say, well, you need to educate yourself.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like listening to other white people yap is not what you need to do. You need to
Yeah.
listen to other voices of color. And that the whole like, oh, I don't see color, like it's devaluing everything that that person is
Experiences.
bringing to your attention.
Yeah. I think we want to be very clear in what we're doing here. So, what we've come to realize is that it's not the fucking duty of Black and brown women to take time to educate us for free. We are very lucky because they have done that and they have been doing that. And they do that for free to the people who have caused them harm. I am someone who has caused harm. I do have a past where I was racist. And it's something that I'm working on. And while it's fucking dumb for us to be sitting here as white women talking about racism, it's also important work because these are the conversations that we as white people need to be having with other white people in order to dismantle white supremacy. If we just sit here and be nice and not talk about it because we want to be nice and we don't want to offend anybody, that's doing more harm than good. And a couple weeks ago, I just want to bring this up quickly. A couple weeks ago on Instagram, I posted about this book specifically on my grid. I've talked about it a couple times on my stories and tagged the authors, and I got a lot of hate for it. And I thought, this is fucking dumb. The comments on it were absolutely astounding. A lot of comments were, white people don't experience privilege. And I thought that was absolutely fucking laughable. Because here's the thing. As somebody who has, first of all, I'm disabled, I am a woman, I'm neurodivergent and I'm autistic. That does not mean that I'm not privileged. I'm privileged as fuck because of the fact that I'm white. Also, another thing that we need to talk about, and for those of you who are on this side of TikTok, there's been a lot of racist tweets coming out from influencers from the past. Now, what we know to be true is that as white people, the apologies were not made for us. And it's not our place to comment on whether we think it was appropriate or not. And the thing is that just because we as white people have endured some type of trauma, it doesn't discount the fact that we are racist. We can be two things at once. You can have experienced trauma and have experienced hardship, but I'm sorry, the way that I move through the world as a white person, I will never understand the Black and brown experience. I will never be able to. I could spend the next 20 years educating myself and doing the work every single day, reading books, and it will never be enough, and it's something that I'll never be able to understand. And the only thing I think that we can do as white people, the thing is that apologies are never going to be enough. You can't undo past behavior. The only thing that you can do is do the anti-racism work to undo those parts of you. And we're going to be talking about, like, I will put in the show notes this book. I will also put in the show notes the documentary, because I do feel genuinely like every single person needs to read this book.
I was gonna say, I think too that like the reality of it is that like one of the reasons that we're opening this podcast essentially with like everyone who is white is also racist.
Yeah.
We're opening that up because racism, right, is a learned pattern of behaviors. It is not innate. It is not intuitive. It is not, the excuse that white people will use, well, like, it's a generational thing. That's just how people were back then.
Yeah.
Like, no, no, it's a learned pattern of behaviors.
Yeah.
You were taught that. Same thing as you're taught any other form of bigotry. And I'm going to refrain from cursing because this is something that I'm very passionate about. But that just sort of behavior is a learned behavior. So it's about doing the anti-racism work to unlearn those patterns of behavior, to unlearn that pattern of thinking, because it does not obviously serve any benefit to anyone.
Yeah.
And like, kind of going back to what you said on like the influencers apologies, right? Like, I think it's important to stress that, like, while knowing it's never going to be enough, that's not an excuse to not do it,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think sometimes it's very easy to use that rhetoric and be like, well, it's never enough, it's never enough, it's never enough,
Yeah.
no matter what I do, it won't be enough. I think that almost also still displaces blame, which in the Deconstructing Karen, like, they hit on a lot, which it was like, accept the blame. A lot of what white
Yeah.
women specifically write, because that's what we're discussing when it comes in terms of uh the documentary, but they will do multiple tactics to kind of displace the blame.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and we'll see that a lot of the times in apology videos, right? Where you're displacing the blame, or, for example, completely exiling someone who was a huge part of your life and your career for a very long time. Like, but you both are white. You both have these learned thoughts, patterns, and behaviors. It's just to what degree that you have to do the unlearning.
So one of the things that we do see a lot in these apology videos is something called white women tears, and it was covered in the documentary. Basically, the concept is, well, I'll just read the definition here. White women tears: your proclivity to cry when faced with discussions on racism, particularly discussions on your own racism. See also white fragility, white nonsense, and your feelings. So it's basically a way to kind of direct the conversation to you and how you're feeling when somebody is telling you about either your own racism actions, how they have affected you, or how somebody has been racist to them in the past. And instead of just letting black and brown people tell us how they feel and how it's affected us, we stop and we sit there and we cry and we make it about us, which is inexcusable. It's not what we should be doing. We should just learn how to sit down and, as they said in the documentary, shut the fuck up and listen and believe people when they tell us things. Another thing that they also covered in the documentary is stop acting shocked when black and brown people tell you their experiences, because it's just erasing somebody's experience. It's another form of racial gaslighting, of making somebody not feel heard when they're telling you something that has happened to you.
I think too, it's a really good example of misplaced white guilt, right? Like, your reaction to your own white guilt can be a negative thing, right? So white guilt describes the guilt that's brought upon the recognition of learned and unfair racial, excuse me, sorry, I read that wrong. It's basically the guilt that's brought on upon the recognition of unearned and unfair racial privileges, the acknowledgement of personal racist attitudes or behavior, and or the sense of responsibility for others' racist attitudes or behavior. So, right, like, I was reading the specific article defining like white guilt versus white shame,
Okay.
and kind of talking about how there's a fine line between the both, where white guilt can be used as a great motivator to doing anti-racism research, to speaking out about things, right? Having the conversations as a white person that you need to be having with other white people.
Yeah.
But there is a fine line where a person can disengage from those feelings of guilt and shame and become defensive, right? Or avoidant, or we can see you deflecting because, I mean, obviously, like, doesn't necessarily feel good to realize that, like, what you've been saying or doing has been harmful, like, you right, and but that's not for you to revel in that moment. It's for you to unpack on your own and deal with in private
Yeah.
and be there and be present to have that conversation when someone is opening up about the harms that racism has done to them personally.
Yeah. You actually had that we were on FaceTime a lot last night talking about this, and you had said to me that I wasn't experiencing white guilt. I was experiencing white shame. It is something that you need to learn how to sit with and work through on your own without making other people
Yeah.
feel bad for you, because at the end of the day, this is an uncomfortable thing that all of us as white people need to do and we need to work through. And us feeling slightly fucking uncomfortable and feeling and experiencing shame and guilt is insanely small by comparison to what black and brown people deal with on a daily basis. And the reason why I'm saying black and brown people, this is the vernacular that the authors Saira Rao and Regina Jackson use. Specifically, they say in this book that the concept, or not the concept, sorry, that the term person of color is also, by using that, is also upholding white supremacy.
I mean, I think the term of people of color, right, is a very umbrella term. We could be talking about multiple different minorities that just basically mean not white. And the reality of it is when we discuss like very, very unethical racism, obviously many minorities have been affected by white supremacy and white racism. But I think truly there is unfortunately one race who has experienced the most of it, and it is black and brown people.
Yeah.
And I think too, right, like for a very long time, people were generalized and grouped together in these stereotypes and these generalizations by white people.
Mm.
So by us being able to say people of color and use that as an umbrella term, it takes away from who we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
And how they prefer to identify.
Yeah.
And it's white people wanting to be politically correct and sound correct and right, and I don't want to offend anybody, rather than just calling people how they want to be called.
Yes, that's what it is. Okay, you did a beautiful job of describing that. And something that you also need to realize, that I've had to realize through anti-racism work, is that you can't undo the past, but you need to realize that through this work, there are going to be people that do not forgive you. And it is within their right. And you can't change how somebody perceives you, but you can do you have to do the work to unlearn what you've been taught, because there's just no fucking excuse to continue on not doing this work. And I think they talk about it so much in the documentary, where we as white women are just so terrified of getting shit wrong and so terrified of not being seen as nice that we're unwilling to talk about it because we're fucking terrified to get shit wrong. Like we said, this episode it's directed and to be listened to, and to have white people take something from it, because these are the conversations that we as white people need to be having with other white people. They just are.
Yeah, I think it's a call to action, right? It's the understanding that we keep saying it time and time and time again, right? Influencer after influencer. The tweets get released. They said some awful, terrible things. I mean, sometimes it's just completely inexcusable, right? It's up to everybody to determine forgiveness. With the same token, I don't think racism is a behavior that can be forgiven by other white people, right? Like I cannot determine anybody's forgiveness in that. But with that being said, it's a call to action, right? Because we can sit here and get on social media every day and doom scroll and say that we support Black content creators and say that we support and amplify Black voices. But the reality of it is obviously as white people, we're not doing enough. And that's just the sick reality of it. Because if we were doing enough, we wouldn't be where we're sitting at right now in 2024. We wouldn't be having the conversations over and over and over again. Nothing, quite literally, nothing has changed. It's just gotten more covert, if that makes sense.
It does, and we've talked also at length about kind of performative activism, and it was something that we were concerned about when making this podcast episode. But that being said, it's better to just talk about it than to not talk about it. We can't deem what is, I guess, performative activism. We can know what we're doing, and it's weird because I think that the most important anti-racism work is just done behind the scenes by yourself, and you're not putting it on display. Like, it's not done to be like, look at me, I'm a white woman and I'm doing the work, and I'm more not racist than the next person, because it's not about being less racist and being more anti-racist than somebody else. It's just about shutting the fuck up and doing the work, because at the end of the day, or as white people, we are all born into white supremacy, and we are all racist, and some people like myself need to do more work than other people do, and that's just all that it is.
Yes, but I think going back to like how the women talked in the documentary, right? Like they were very clear and upfront. The most dangerous women, right? And again, I keep saying women because that's what the documentary is about.
Yeah.
And they're basically making a claim that white women do have the opportunity, based on where they're at in society, to potentially make large impacts on where we stand as society with racism.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, white women are seen being complacent in white supremacy. And we're in a very weird notch of society where we have the opportunity to speak up and speak out.
Yeah.
With that being said, being obviously a woman in society, a lot of white women feel that like they kind of graze over things with this concept of like, well, I'm a woman, so like I've experienced awful things as well, right? Also, like not go away. But then they also like this thin veil of like, I love everyone though. Like we love, we're all human. We all bleed the same blood. That's something that was really referenced heavy. And I think obviously like me and you have had different experiences with our backgrounds and such.
Yeah.
So that stuff has always rang true to me to be like extremely covertly racist, like white bigotry. Like I've
Yeah.
like that's always rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
But even like looking at it as how it's progressed over time, to see none of those conversations have changed, and you've got two very frustrated women of color at their wits end, right? They went on a whole tangent about how at this point like they feel so hopeless, like they don't even know why they're doing it anymore.
Yeah.
And at this point it's really just coming from a place of love because they just have nothing left to give.
Yeah.
And something that I think is a good segue point is that white women will have this reaction of like, oh my God, you don't trust me. Oh my God, you assume that that's how I am because
Yeah.
of those people. And it's like, why do you feel so personally attacked?
Yeah.
When this conversation isn't about you.
It's like, as white people, the worst thing that can happen to us is being called racist, which is unbelievable.
The worst thing that could happen to us is that we get canceled and the privilege that we were naturally given and born with is taken away.
And the thing also that we realize is that white women like us who get canceled don't see repercussions.
Nothing happens.
And we still
as much as we
our money.
Yes.
It doesn't. It literally doesn't matter. You'll see it time and time again. We've seen it recently. We've seen it in the past. It will continue to happen. And what I want to be very careful, because again, I don't want to. The apology videos were not made for me. What I think is quite interesting, though, is that if you go into the comment section of white creators who are followed by lots of other white women, you go into the comment section saying, and you have a lot of white people saying, they could never make me hate you. I forgive you. And it's like, we're white. We don't have to, this is not our place to fucking forgive people, because it's not an apology that was made for us. The tweets weren't directed at us. It didn't hurt us. We still move about our life and operate in the same way, while frankly, tens of millions of black people are reading these things that are just fucking horrific, and it's like these wounds are being reopened again and again and again by people whose content they consume, trust, and like, and it's fucking heartbreaking.
Well, and I think too, right? Like because like that's going back to the entire like white women being complacent, because the
Yeah,
reality of it is when we talk about white privilege, right? We're not just talking about the fact of like representation, voice. We're not talking about the capitalistic gains of generational wealth. Like we're not talking about all of that. It's also the fact that with all that privilege that we are born with,
yeah,
one, we're so scared of doing anything that could get it taken away that we're complacent in not standing up for people of color, black women, black men. Like we are so complacent in not speaking up because we don't want the one thing that we feel like we have power, our voice, to be taken away when it happens, and then the voice isn't ever taken away because white women will continuously take their white privilege, their capital gain, their resources, their voice, their vote, and they will put it still in those people who what got on the internet and sobbed because they said awful things, like, right? Like, and again, I think there's, and maybe this is where my mindset also needs to be adjusted, right? Because I think everyone has learned racist patterns and behaviors. But when we see this like absolute horrendous display of it, we're like, oh my God, that's horrible. That's terrible, right? But the reality of it is like,
it's around us
no
everywhere.
matter what degree it is, it's terrible. It's
Yeah,
horrendous. It's awful.
yeah,
Like, grow up and wake up and start allocating, right? Like, if everyone were to unfollow those influencers and stop buying their tickets and buying their merch and putting money into their platform and following their, like, she wouldn't have a voice if we'd stop giving it to her, or they wouldn't have a voice if we'd stop giving it to them. Politicians wouldn't be able to do the stuff that they've been doing if the people wouldn't give them the power. And that's where the complacency becomes dangerous. Go ahead. I
you
was
can.
gonna say, just because we're allowed to have the right, just because we're allowed to be able to live in denial and put it somewhere deep down and not discuss it,
Yeah,
allows continuous generations of racism to exist and continue and worsen.
yeah.
And I know obviously we live in different countries, so things are a little bit different, but I know a whole other topic to get into, but even like just where I currently live and the city that I am living in, it's not my natural, like where I grew up or anything, but
Mhm.
it's got a nasty history, and North Carolina does a wonderful job at burying that history.
Yeah.
So that's why it's also important to educate your children as white people, because yes, while they teach certain things in school, they're not teaching it to the degree that they need to, that's going to foster behavior and societal change.
So I think we like should move into, I guess, the deconstructing and reprogramming portion of the
Yeah.
episode. Um, so one thing that really stuck out to us and really uh, didn't surprise us, but it was an interesting display of racism is there were two people who were very much Republican on this documentary who said that they voted for Trump, and there was a white Democrat woman, and this is where we're talking about and how they talked about in the documentary that white liberal like leftist women are the most dangerous because while the two Trump supporters within the filmed portion of the documentary had shifted their perspective, there was a white woman who had said, she was basically just like, well, love is love. And why can't we just all love each other and love Trump's everything and blah, 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 blah. She's basically coming at it from this toxic positivity mindset of, well, if we were all just kind and sweet to each other. And Saira Rao goes, well, where is that toxic positivity when someone is threatening to kill my daughter because she's brown? Like, if love were love and everything were sunshines, butterflies, and rainbows, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, but we are. Like, that kind of indifference and turning the other cheek is still white supremacy. It's upholding white supremacy, and it's not doing anybody good by just not having the conversations that need to be had just because you think that love is love. Like, it's just, it's also a form of gaslighting. And that's another thing that needs to be dealt with when deconstructing racism, doing anti-racism work and reprogramming, is a form of gaslighting is acting shocked when brown and black people tell you their experiences, and saying things like, well, that happens to me all the time and I'm white. Are you sure that you said that? Are you sure that they said that? And it's just another way in which we need to shut the fuck up and listen when people are telling us about their experiences and not making it about us.
Yeah, I think it's very common for white people. I've even seen it happen. I'm very quick to correct it though, because it pisses me off. Obviously, emotions as a white person shouldn't be involved in this, but it's something that does get under my skin, because the reality of it is it's extremely tone deaf to meet a black or brown person with the rebuttal of like, well, I haven't been privileged. I've lived a very hard life. Da, 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 da. I think me and you can stand here today and say, we would not change a single thing about our lives except our skin color. And the minute that we changed our skin color, everything of our life would look different. Our opportunities, our access to health, our access to care. I guarantee you there is a high percentage chance we would not be sitting here with microphones in our hand today.
Yeah.
So the reality of it is as difficult as it is to look the reality in the face, a lot of people with toxic positivity need to wake up to, it's not about all kindness and it's not about love and light. It unfortunately is not. Countries make lots of capital gains and success off of things like this. The racism that has continued, at least personally in my country, literally benefits white people financially, generationally. So it's not just about love and light. This is going to be deconstructing a society that's existed for over hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Racism has always been around and it will not go away until we start reprogramming, decentering, and deconstructing, starting with ourselves, but then taking that into our institutionalized, sanctioned areas, right? Because that's the issue as well. Racism is very institutionalized, and that whole toxic positivity mindset brushes over the foundation that it's been built upon, as if it's just some choice between like kindness and hate. And the reality of it is it's not. I think
Well, it's
that's something
also,
we talked about.
yeah, it's just erasing people's experiences when you say stuff like
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
we've talked about it before, like, you're autistic, I'm autistic. Let me be clear in saying that I don't know statistically what this is, but I do know for a fact that autism within black and brown people is underreported and underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed. And when it comes to financial gain, especially with black and brown creators, I was talking to a creator friend of mine, and I was just under the wrong and complete false assumption that I did know that white creators got paid. And again, I didn't know this because first of all, I didn't do the work to learn it. One. Two, I do live in Canada, so we don't have TikTok. We don't have creator funds where we get paid for views on Instagram or on TikTok. So I'm not aware of how much I would get paid. I know that if I were, what I am learning is that if my rate per view as a white person, if I were creating content in the United States, is vastly different and disproportionate to black and brown people. And I was under the impression that it was just when it came to brand deals, white creators were being paid more. No, these apps are literally built to reward white creators and to just not pay people of color for the same type of content. Like, the fact is when I was talking to a brown creator, she was telling me that the rate per view on some white creators' videos are 1.3 versus 0.3, which is fucking astounding to me. it should not be astounding to me, and I shouldn't be shocked by that, because that is the reality of it. But the only way that we're going to change things is by talking about it. And I was wrong for saying that I was astounded by it, because frankly, it's just not that fucking shocking.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something too is like I think as white women we love to, oh my god, that's so horrible and
Yeah,
horrendous. And like we've even just done it our fucking selves, excuse my language.
yeah,
We even just did it ourselves.
yeah,
But it's the reality of it's like, oh my god, I cannot fathom. And can we, like,
yeah.
I can. I'm not shocked at this point.
No,
And at this point I'm frankly disgusted. I'm getting to a point where, right, like it's like deconstructing racism is not just about the acknowledging part. Like that's step one.
yeah,
And some people don't even make it there.
yeah,
But I think it's very important as white people that we don't stop there. We don't like stand up and congratulate ourselves like, "Oh wow, look, I'm acknowledging that I have racist learned behaviors because I was born white." Like
yeah.
I think
It's
it's
the
more
fucking
important that
least
we
we can do.
put your money where like your mouth is.
Yeah,
Right? Like we will love to get on here with our microphones and talk about how awful it is and how we need to support and amplify. But I think it's really important that collectively, as a community, between the communities that we're building and creating on our own, but between the ones of a community that we're currently in physically, that we need to do better and hold each other accountable to doing better and amplifying Black creator voices and making sure that, obviously from a perspective of just looking at finances, it's not like, oh wow, like there's a huge drastic difference. But the reality of it is being a white person, you have benefited from generational wealth over and over and over and over and over again.
yeah.
And not saying that financial contributions are what's needed to make differences, but I will say that that's where like again, we can sit here and talk all day as white people, but it's not until we start putting action and putting again our money where our mouth is and going to protest and not riling people up, but actually standing in support and sitting down and shutting the fuck up,
Yeah.
that things are actually going to get better. And I know even myself, like this is something I've always been passionate about, but I even told you, like, I've been someone who's been more comfortable doing it in my personal life in a private sense because I was like, what the hell is a white bitch gonna do
Yeah.
yip yapping on a podcast about something that she's never even
Yeah.
experienced? But I think you're right. Like it's time that Black and brown voices stop having to educate us because it's not their responsibility.
Especially for free when we're the ones who have caused them.
Right.
I don't know how much good it's doing to just regurgitate like the same information over and over again. I think that this is
Yeah.
probably a good place to end it. A good call to action that I think I would like to personally leave you with is to read this book, buy this book, buy it, buy
Buy it.
it. Um, like just buy it. You know,
Just buy it. Let it sit on your shelf. Just
last I
buy it.
checked, someone was reaching out to me about it, and last I checked, it was on sale on Amazon. So it's by Saira Rao and Regina Jackson. And if you are not in a place financially where you're able to afford that book, even if you are able to afford the book, we would suggest you watching the documentary called Deconstructing Karen. On in the US, it is available on Amazon Prime. It's not here. I believe when we were watching it last night, because I wasn't able to get it on Prime. There is a free version on CBC. It is a shortened version. I believe it's 52 minutes by comparison to an hour and a half. But basically, just the first step is acknowledging the fact that we as white people are born into white supremacy. We are all inherently racist, and we need to do the work to unlearn those behaviors on a daily basis. It's not, like you said last night, it's not a one and done. You can't just read one book one day and then you're done with all the work. It's constantly calling out behavior of people around you, unlearning and calling out your own racial biases. It is amplifying Black, brown, and Indigenous voices. And it's just continuing to learn more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to I know me personally moving forward, I've set a bunch of like new, not even necessarily new, but like a revamped sense of like where I need my education to go.
Yeah.
When it comes to being anti-racist. Obviously, like I'm very much someone who thinks it's important to back it up all with action, right? So
Yeah.
making sure that you're doing the reading, but also the reflection, making sure that you're listening to Black and brown voices, but on top of it, right, like opt to buy from small owned Black businesses.
Yeah.
Opt for those things because that's really where it's going to make the difference. And while as a white person, like just looking at your finances, it doesn't feel like you've been benefiting from generations of wealth and generations of systematic racism, but you have. And I implore you that the best way to deal with your white guilt and shame is to invest it into action to change things rather than just being complacent in it.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you're listening and you're white, we hope you feel uncomfortable because you have to feel uncomfortable in order to grow. We've said it time and time again. And the first step is acknowledging and putting in the work. So we thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. And that's where we're going to leave it today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and taking the time to do whatever education I hope that you are doing after this. And I hope it's a conversation that we continue to have here at Anti-Filter as well.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys, and we will see you next week.